This is part 3 of our 3-part series on how to create your own retirement plan. In part 1, we had you collect statistics in 6 areas of financial planning. If you haven't already seen that, here's a link to that video. In part 2, we gave you the permission to dream, and dream big with your partner to answer the question, where do we want to go? And in this final episode, we're going to help you answer the question, how are we going to get there? We're going to identify a series of specific tasks based on the data that you've collected and the dreams that you've identified. Towards the end of the video, we're going to see a live sort of give and take as we look at a mythical couple trying to decide which of their goals they can achieve and which ones maybe they need to cut back on. So stick around. Hi, I'm Scott. I was a college professor for many years, and now I teach couples like you close to retirement how to clarify your goals, master your money, and gain confidence as you enter the next chapter. In episode 1, I had you collect 20 statistics across 6 areas of financial planning. Those areas were your financial statement, insurance, taxes, investments, estate planning, and retirement planning. So we're going to step through and highlight a couple of those statistics and give you an idea of some actions that you might want to take. Now clearly this is a little too custom that I can make in this video, but I'm going to give you some general rules of thumb, some common actions that I see clients take as they put together their retirement plan. So let's start off with area number 1, your financial position. In there, item number 2 that you collected was your emergency fund, or what we call your cash reserves. And it wasn't just a total number, it was a number with respect to months of living expenses. Now you're probably familiar with the rule of thumb that you should have anywhere from 3 to 6 months of cash available for those unexpected expenses. Car repairs, HVAC goes out, so forth and so on. So take a look at that number that you collected, item number 2. How many months of cash do you have? And if it's more than 3 or certainly more than 6, no action taken. If it's less than that, your action is, how can we build up those cash reserves? Pull some money from some other areas of investments over the next several months, increase those savings. Area 2 is insurance. There we collected item number 4. Statistics number 4 was, how much do you have in life insurance? Now you may not need any going into retirement. In fact, it's rare that people do. But normally life insurance is used to replace lost income. So now that you're retiring, you won't have an income to be replaced. But maybe you have some specific goals for life insurance, whether it's paying off the house. Maybe you have some charitable goals that you want to achieve with life insurance. You want to take a look at whether it's term life insurance versus whole life insurance. If it's whole life insurance, you may have been paying into that for years and sort of feel this emotional attachment to keeping it, and that's a possibility. But your action here is to reconsider how much life insurance, if any, that you need, and then maybe get rid of your insurance if you can without giving up too much money. Item number 4 was, how much umbrella liability insurance do you have? Now you may not have any, but I talked about in episode 1 that umbrella liability insurance covers you above and beyond whatever typically your home insurance and your auto insurance is. So maybe that's $500,000 of protection if you're found at fault for a car accident. There's going to be some physical damage to the other people's car, maybe some medical expenses if some people get hurt. And so although $500,000 might sound like a lot, if it's a multi-car accident that you are responsible for, or some other kind of lawsuit that makes its way to you, then you're going to have you want some protection to protect your assets. So, item number 6, how much umbrella insurance do you have? If 0, then your action from this particular activity is to talk to your homeowner insurance agent, maybe your auto owner insurance agent, and see if they provide umbrella liability insurance, and just find out how much it is. Generally pretty cheap. It might be $200-300 max to get $1 million of coverage, maybe even $2 million of coverage. Area number 3 is taxes. Item 10 that I asked you to track down is your marginal tax rate. So you're going to find that on a tax bracket form. It's going to be based on your top level of income. So maybe you're making $100,000 a year, or $120,000 or $72,000. Whatever that is, that's going to determine the maximum tax rate that you pay for every future dollar. Well, why is this important? Now, in married couples, the tax bracket goes up to about $100,000, and you're paying 12% of your income of taxes. From $100,000 to $200,000, roughly, it jumps up to 22% of taxes. So there's this sweet spot here, or if you can somehow keep your income below $100,000, then your marginal tax rate is 12%. Now, you may not be able to do that because your income is already higher than that, but certainly keeping it below $200,000 is going to be valuable to stay in what we call the 22% tax bracket. Well, why is that important? Well, one of the common actions that people like to perform after they've retired and before they start Social Security, certainly before they start doing required minimum distributions from their retirement accounts, are called Roth conversions. You've undoubtedly heard that term. Well, the goal of a Roth conversion is to pull money out now from your IRA, pay taxes now at potentially a lower rate rather than later. Well, if you're taking a look at your tax brackets and you're within that 22% or certainly within that 12%, this would be a good opportunity to potentially move money from your IRA to a Roth IRA, pay taxes now, but at the 12% rate, if you can manage that, as opposed to later when you start receiving Social Security and start retrieving money from your IRAs, your tax bracket might creep higher. What else? Just be familiar with your upper tax bracket, so your marginal tax bracket, so that any kind of actions that you can take, you know whether you're saving 12% in taxes versus you're saving 22% in taxes. Area number 4 is investments. Some of the statistics I had you collect there was item 12. What is your stock to bond ratio for your overall investment portfolio? So that was going to be the time intensive one if you took time to do that. So maybe you're at 70% stocks and 30% bonds, or 60-40 or 50-50 or 90-10. Those are just nice round numbers. Well, this is important to know because as we get closer to retirement, normally we want to rebalance, have fewer stocks and more bonds percentage-wise, because we have fewer years to ride out a potential stock market crash. Stock market crashes are going to happen. It's just a matter of when. So we really don't want those to happen in our first 1 or 2 years of retirement if we can avoid it. But one way to minimize the damage is to have a smaller percentage of stocks than bonds. So your action is take a look at what you currently are, do some research, figure out where you probably should be, and maybe that's going to involve selling and buying stocks and mutual funds and bonds and mutual funds so that you can get to a ratio that makes sense. And one of the other numbers was item number 12, I believe, your average management fees. So there I had you look up all the actual numbers and see whether you're paying 0.5% or 0.03%. And any mutual funds or investments that you're paying above 0.5 is probably too high. I think you can get by with smaller numbers. I'm a big proponent of what are called index funds. Index funds often have fees of less than 0.1% as an example. So your action is be more well informed about how much each of your individual investments are costing you. We don't see them specifically on our statements each month or every quarter, but they are sucking money out of our accounts. Area number 5, estate planning. How many years has it been since you updated your estate documents? Now, if that number is bigger than 10, let's suppose, then your action in this area should be talk with an estate planning attorney or get informed about the big 4 or 5 documents that you really should have in place. Certainly a will and a trust are the biggies, but you also want to have a healthcare power of attorney, a legal power of attorney. You want to have what's called a letter of instruction so that if you pass prematurely or unexpectedly, either talk with an estate planning attorney, which would be ideal, or there are some online solutions such as LegalZoom and willsandtrust.com that you could take a look at. They may or may not be appropriate for you, but for very simple cases, it might be useful to use them. And then finally, the fun one, area 6, is retirement planning. So in episode 2 of this series, I asked you to dream big about what you wanted to do during retirement, what you wanted to spend money on, how do you want to spend your time, where do you want to live. So to demonstrate this scenario, I'm going to do a live demo of a couple and a conversation where they've taken the time to identify their goals, and then we're going to step through using some financial planning software to identify which of these goals are realistic and which might have to be cut back. So meet Greg and Sue. They are both 62. They currently plan to retire at age 65, of which they're going to also start Social Security. They've run the numbers from episode 1 of this series, and they think that their basic living expenses are going to be $5,000 per month. But above and beyond that, they're identifying what they call fun money, to be able to eat out more and join the country club and do local travel for weekends and so forth. And they're going to add to that another $2,000 per month. $2,000 per month times 12 is $24,000 per year for their fun money. They want to travel. And so right now they've allocated $10,000 per year for the first 15 years of their retirement. Now they realize they're not going to travel for 30 years of retirement, more than likely, but the first 15, from 65 to 80, it's reasonable, possibly. They're excited about that. So $10,000 per year for that. They factored in car replacement. So they like modest cars. So in today's dollars, they spend about $35,000 on a car. They want to replace that car every 6 years, but there's 2 of them. They each have their own car. So that means every 3 years, they're replacing one of those 2 cars. They have 3 grandkids. They want to contribute to their college. Now the grandkids are getting close to college, so rather than contributing to a college fund per se, they want to give each kid $20,000 when they become a freshman in college. And it turns out that their 3 grandchildren are spaced out by 2 years. Another goal that they have is they want to leave $100,000 at their death, so through their will, for their alma mater, for their university that they're very proud of. So those were all the goals that they identified, and now we want to see whether or not they can achieve them. So let's take a look at the conversation that I had with them as we step through the financial planning software. All right, so here's Greg and Sue. They identified in episode 1 their goals, and here in the software that I'm using, we're going to show what they came up with. So their retirement age is 65. Call it they are 62 now. Their monthly living expenses during retirement are $5,000 per month. That's just their basic living expenses. Here's that $100,000 gift to the university at their passing. Car replacement. So for a lot of these goals, we can put in when we want it to start, if we want it to recur or not. So in this particular case, we have it recurring every 3 years because there's 2 cars that they're replacing, staggering every 3 years. And the basic cost in today's dollars is $35,000. It's going to start at his retirement. They're retiring together, but at his retirement. And it's going to happen for the next 15 years. So they're going to get, about 2.5 new cars, each going to get 2 cars during that time span, something like that. We did the same thing for their travel. So travel is going to be $10,000 per year, and that's going to occur every year for 15 years. So it's important when you're coming up with your goals as well, is to be specific as possible and don't just assume that these numbers are going to happen all the way through retirement, because then that would be pretty cost prohibitive. Each of the grandchildren, so $20,000 when they become freshmen in college. Those are spread out across 2-year spans. And then their fund money. So that's an extra $2,000 every month that they came up with, as I said, for country club memberships and eating out more often and weekend getaways, whatever is going to put into there that said, yeah, we can get by on $5,000, but we'd really like to spend $7,000. So that's an extra $2,000 per month, or $24,000 per year. And then what I like to add is, for all my clients, is we don't know what's going to happen in terms of need for long-term care. So to be extra cautious, I put in 2 years of not assisted living, but in-home care the last 2 years of the person's life. And so if we take a look at what that looks like, in today's dollars, the average is about $75,000 to bring in some part-time help. So I'm going to add that inflation adjusted for the next, if they're 62 right now, it might be 25 years before they need this. So it's going to be a lot more expensive than 75,000 per year at the time. But we add that to the tail end of their retirement plan, once again, just to be a little extra cautious. It's not something they're going to be eager to spend up money on, and they may not. And then again, they might have to spend more than this if it's going to be moving into assisted care. But this is sort of a nice average between the two. So those are all their goals. We can take a quick look at their investments. So we have just two placeholders here for this example. They have 600,000 in an IRA and they have 100,000 in a Roth. So we ran what's called a Monte Carlo simulation. So this is a pretty advanced statistical analysis based on what we know about the history of the stock market. We know that sometimes the stock market goes up, sometimes it goes down. Sometimes it goes way up. Sometimes it goes way down. We know that bonds go up some. They don't go down all that much, but occasionally they will. So if we combine all these together and what we know about the history of the stock market for the last 50 years or so, we can do our best to project into the future. Now, it's not going to be perfect, but it's at least an analysis. And so the way I think about a Monte Carlo simulation is rolling some dice. Now, we know rolling two pairs of dice, or a pair of dice, is going to give you a number anywhere between 2 and 12. The number that's going to happen more often, because it's in the center of the average, is the 7, because there's more ways to roll a 7. Whereas there's only one way to roll a 2, double ones. There's only one way to roll a 12, double sixes. So if we were to graph rolling dice one after another, we'd eventually see a nice bell curve that said generally those numbers are going to be in the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 range, and less often on each tail end of that bell curve. Well, it's the same way with the stock market. We know on average it might be 8%. So 8% is the average equivalent to the number 7 on the dice. Sometimes it's going to be higher than that. Sometimes it's going to be lower than that. So long story short, too late, I know. But the Monte Carlo simulation is going to project into the future 1,000 times. And at the end of these projections, we're going to see, did Greg and Sue end up with money? If they did, the simulation considers that to be a success. If they didn't, even if they're $1 short, it's not a success. And out of these 1,000 simulations, it's going to give us a percentage of how many of those simulations worked and ended up with money. So when we do this simulation for them, we're looking at this value on the right-hand side. It's 39%. That says that 39% of those simulations, they ended up with money when they died at age 92 with all those goals that we threw in for them. Well, that's sort of low. Now, we don't want it to be 100%. The numbers I like to shoot for are 75 to 80%. Why those numbers? Well, anything higher than that, certainly when you get to 90% or above, you have a much better chance of dying with a lot of money left over. Now, that might be your goal, and maybe you want to do that for charity or for kids or for grandkids, and that's fine. But most of us want to spend as much as we can throughout our life and not necessarily die with zero, which some people have that goal. But put in context then, we're looking for success range of 75 to 80%. So this 39% is a little low. So I had to have a conversation with Greg and Sue. Said, well, let's take a look at all these goals. And so here down below, we see each of these goals that we can either toggle on or off or modify a little bit. And I said, of these goals, which of those are you willing to give up if necessary? Or the other option is that we could have Greg work beyond age 65. So the longer he works, the more he continues to contribute to his retirement, the less they're pulling out of retirement. So you can imagine, if it makes sense, the longer he works, the higher the percentage. So just to demonstrate that, let's say, all right, Greg, let's suppose you want to live to 68 or work to 68, or at least that's what Sue wants him to do. If we do that and update the number on the left, goes to 73%. That fixes the problem. So all we need to do is have Greg work until age 68 and 65. Now he says, oh, wait a minute. I don't want to do that. I'm getting close to the end of my career. I'm ready to have fun. So I do not want to work to 68. All right, so we will take that back to 65. So of these remaining goals, what can we cut back on? Well, they both agreed it would be nice to support our university, but that's not our highest goal by any means. So let's dial that back. In fact, let's take university goal to 0. Now let's readjust our Monte Carlo and see how much improvement we've seen. Wow, doesn't change hardly at all. So it goes from 39% to 40. All right, well, what else are you willing to give up? Greg and Sue, talk it over. Now, this is a very accelerated version of that conversation that they had. They said, well, that fund money, we said 2,000 per month, but that's probably pretty high. Let's dial that back to 1,000 per month. So that's 12,000 per year. Now, this should have a pretty big impact because this is for each and every year for what their 30 years, 28 years of retirement. So if we cut that back, how does that help? Quite a bit. So it jumps up to 59%. So we're not there yet, but we're making progress. Well, they talked about the 3 grandkids and the $20,000 for each. They definitely want to keep that. So we're not going to play around with that at all. They said travel, though. All right, so 15 years, that's a little ambitious. Why don't we cut that back to 10? Now, when I do that with this software, I can't just cut that back for the what's called the proposed plan. I've got to go back to the drawing board and change it to from the original plan as well. So if we go back to their goals and their travel, and instead of 15 years, we do 10 years. And while we're here, let's also modify that car replacement ever so slightly. If it allows Greg to retire at age 65 instead, what if we do it every 4 years? So that means that, remember this alternating pattern, each of them gets a new car every 8 years. Not what they originally wanted, but something they are willing to give up on. So let's change that. Now, when we go back to the original Monte Carlo scenario, the original, not 39%, is going to go up a little bit as well because we've lopped up some of the travel and some of the car replacements. So let's see where they are. So that went from 39 to 47 for the original plan. And our updated plan, where we got rid of the university, cut the fund money in half, it's up to 66%, getting closer. And then I said, well, here's the good news for this story. This simulation is assuming that all of your expenses are going to increase year after year by inflation. That's a pretty cautious estimate because we know from history, from the statistics, is that as people age, they start to spend less. They do less activities. They travel less, a variety of reasons why they spend less. Yes, it's true at the very end of their life, it might tick up a little bit for healthcare, but in general, it flattens out a little bit. So off to the right here, notice that the current plan is using what's called inflation adjusted. Each and every year, our expenses are $5,000 per month, $60,000 per year for basic living expenses, goes up by inflation. Well, I have the opportunity to change that up a little bit and change that to what's called retirement spending stages. So you've heard of the go-go years and the slow-go years and the no-go years. So this acknowledges that in each of those different time frames, you tend to start spending less, sort of a stair step down. So what this does is simulate after the first 10 years, we're going to spend a little less for those next 10 years. Each year it's going to increase for inflation, but overall it's going to be less than what we would have done originally. So if I change that, and this is really just simulating going forward how our expenses grow. In this case, the expenses are going to grow more slowly and therefore less to spend and therefore should increase our success rate. So if I refresh this, almost there, very close. So we've still got our major goals. We're still traveling quite a bit. We're replacing our cars. We're paying for our grandkids. We've got an extra $1,000 per month for fund money. Is there anything else that I can do a little bit? So there's another category that I can say, reality is, and this is looking really good. This is saying 72% of the time that you are going to not run out of money at all. And in fact, on average, what this number here says, there's a good chance, well, a 50% chance, that you're going to die with 1.8 million. All right, that's a pretty good buffer.
So that alone might allow people to be comfortable with this particular plan. But recognize that another adjustment that we can make is to say, if you're willing in year one, let's spend like this. But if we have a particularly bad stock market or inflation goes up real high, if you're open to occasionally, every few years, adjusting that, saying, well, we're not going to get that big raise like we have been, or we're not going to increase our spending by inflation this year because we had a bad stock market last year. This doesn't happen often, it may not happen at all. But if it does, and you're willing to be flexible, so this is called another spending category called floor and ceiling. It's very similar to a thing called guardrails that you may have heard about, but it's not guardrails called that in this software at least. So if I adjust this to floor and ceiling, this just says occasionally we're always going to get raises, generally going to get raises, but sometimes we're going to have to cap that raise. Other times we're going to have to take a little bit of a loss or a cutback from one year to another, not as big of a raise. It might be a little small raise. If we can do these adjustments only when necessary, and maybe we don't even have to, that's going to help this simulation and update 80%, right where I'd like to see. So this worked out pretty well for Greg and Sue. And you can understand that it's great to dream big early on in phase 2, episode 2 of this series, so that you can decide what can you cut back if necessary, rather than just not dreaming big.
All right, so that was pretty interesting. Greg and Sue had to give up on some of their goals. Interesting to hear their conversations and dialogues to see what they prioritize, but they got to a pretty good point where they could achieve most of their goals, if not all. Now, you won't be able to necessarily use the software that I just showed you because that's available for financial planners. But there are 2 sources I would give you insight that you might choose if you want to do your own financial planning and do your own Monte Carlo simulation. One is a company called Boldin.com, Boldin.com. Now, I haven't used this myself, but it's very well respected in the financial planning arena. Take a look at it. They have a free version that you can do some work with, some simulations with, and they have a paid version, relatively inexpensive, where you can put a lot more data in, all that stuff that we did from episode 1, and you can build your own simulation. So that's a possibility. Another one is our friend ChatGPT. Now, I haven't tried this either myself, but I can imagine I dabbled ever so slightly. But go to ChatGPT and ask them, help me create a Monte Carlo simulation for my retirement plan. And I suspect it's going to give you a series of questions or a list of data that it wants. Now, be real careful with this though, because with all software, and especially AI, is you don't quite know what's going on in the background. So the more data that you are able to control and put in, the better the results will be, but it's still be cautious. So this brings us to the end of our 3-part series on how to build your own retirement plan. Hopefully this will inspire you to take a look and put in the time to put together your own plan. I'm an advice-only planner, so that means that I don't charge for assets under management. I don't ask clients to bring their money to my company. That's just too much of a commitment. Instead, what I do is work one-on-one with the couples to educate them along the way as we work together to build their retirement plan with specific actions for them to take. To learn more about that, follow the link down below, take a look at my website, learn more about me and my approach to financial advising. Until then.